If you can afford this car, I'll quit my job right now. The sentence cracked across the luxury showroom so loudly that even the pianist playing near the marble staircase missed a note. A few customers turned instantly. Others pretended not to stare while still listening carefully. Nathan Whitmore stood beside the black Rolls-Royce Phantom with one hand resting on the polished hood, his expensive silver watch flashing beneath the showroom lights. The smile on his face wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile people used when they already believed they had one. Across from him stood Elijah Brooks, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in faded jeans, worn brown boots, and a charcoal work jacket still carrying faint dust from a construction site. In one hand, he held an old wooden cane with scratches along the handle, not because he needed help walking, but because it had belonged to his father. The contrast between the two men felt almost theatrical beneath the crystal chandeliers and soft jazz drifting through the air. Somewhere near the espresso bar, someone chuckled quietly. Then another laugh followed. Nathan spread his hands dramatically toward the Phantom. $480,000, he said louder this time, making sure nearby customers heard every word. That's before customization. More laughter rippled through the showroom. Elijah didn't react. He simply looked at the car, calm and unreadable, like the noise around him belonged to another world entirely. Outside the towering glass windows, rainwater still clung to the sidewalks from a late afternoon storm. Elijah's old pickup truck sat parked near the curb between a Bentley SUV and a white Mercedes convertible. One of the valets had stared at the truck when he arrived, uncertain whether to let it park near the front entrance. Nathan noticed Elijah's silence and mistook it for embarrassment. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound insulting without technically crossing the line. "Sir, people usually browse before asking about this model." Elijah slowly turned toward him. His eyes were steady, patient. "Good thing I'm not browsing." For a brief second, the showroom quieted. Nathan blinked once, surprised the man answered so calmly. Then his smile returned, sharper now. A young saleswoman standing near the reception desk shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, but she stayed silent. Nobody challenged Nathan Whitmore inside Whitmore Luxury Motors. Not when he controlled bonuses. Not when he decided who stayed employed. Nathan gave a soft laugh and tossed the key fob onto the glass counter beside Elijah. The metallic sound echoed across the marble floor. "Go ahead," he said. "Sit inside if you want the full experience." Another customer smirked openly now. Elijah glanced down at the keys but didn't touch them. Instead, his gaze drifted slowly across the showroom, the polished floors, the imported Italian leather chairs, the enormous portrait of the dealership founder hanging near the ceiling. He had seen rooms like this his entire life. Rooms where people measured human value before a single conversation began. Nathan folded his arms. "Or maybe," he added, "you should start with something more realistic." The words hung in the air. Cold. Precise. Designed to humiliate without raising his voice. Elijah finally looked back at him, and something about his expression made the laughter nearby begin to fade. Not anger. Not shame. Just disappointment. Quiet disappointment. And somehow, that felt heavier than anything else. Then Elijah reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The phone rested quietly in Elijah Brooks's hand while the entire showroom watched him with the kind of curiosity usually reserved for street performers or public arguments. Nathan Whitmore adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit and gave a smug little smile toward the customers nearby, clearly enjoying the attention. The soft piano music resumed near the staircase, but the atmosphere had already changed. People were listening now. Elijah lowered his eyes briefly to the old photograph tucked behind his phone case. The edges were faded from years of use. A younger version of his mother smiled back at him from a tiny front porch in Savannah, Georgia, wearing a pale yellow cleaning uniform and holding a paper cup of lemonade against the summer heat. For a moment, the noise inside the showroom seemed distant. He remembered sitting beside her in an apartment with broken air conditioning while she pointed at a glossy magazine picture of a Rolls-Royce Phantom and laughed softly. One day, she had joked, "I want to ride in one just once before these old feet give out." She had worked 3 jobs back then. Hotels in the morning. Office buildings at night. Sometimes houses on weekends when bills stacked too high. Elijah never forgot the way wealthy people used to glance through her like she was invisible. The same look still existed. It just wore nicer clothes now. Nathan mistook Elijah's silence for hesitation. "Listen," he said with fake patience, "there is no shame in dreaming big. Maybe start with a pre-owned Cadillac. We have excellent financing programs." A couple standing near the espresso machine laughed under their breath. Elijah slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked slowly around the Phantom instead, running his fingers lightly across the smooth black finish. The car reflected the ceiling lights like dark water at midnight. "My mother used to clean houses for people who drove cars like this," Elijah said quietly. Nathan raised an eyebrow, already bored with the conversation. "That so?" Elijah nodded once. "She said the leather always smelled different when money touched it." The young saleswoman near reception looked down awkwardly, pretending to organize paperwork. Something about Elijah's voice carried no bitterness. Only memory. Only truth. Nathan shrugged. "Well, hard work pays off eventually." Elijah looked directly at him then. "Sometimes," he replied. "Sometimes people work hard their entire lives and still get treated like they do not belong." The words landed softly, but they made the nearby laughter disappear. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance while evening traffic crawled through the wet Atlanta streets. A valet walked past the glass entrance carrying umbrellas for arriving customers. Nathan crossed his arms tighter. He hated conversations that drifted away from his control. "Sir," he said, sharper now, "are you buying the vehicle or wasting everyone's time?" Elijah studied him for another long second. There it was again. That familiar hunger to measure human worth before offering respect. Elijah had seen it in private banks, country clubs, boardrooms, and charity galas. People changed their tone depending on the shoes you wore when you walked through the door. Slowly, Elijah reached into his jacket again and removed a slim black card holder. The leather was worn at the corners from use. Nathan barely glanced at it. But the young saleswoman did. Her eyes widened slightly the moment she noticed the small silver emblem pressed into the corner. Blackstone Horizon Capital. One of the largest private investment firms in the Southeast. She looked back up at Elijah carefully now, suddenly unsure of everything happening in front of her. Meanwhile Nathan kept talking, unaware the entire room was beginning to shift around him. The silver emblem on the card holder caught the light for only a second, but it was enough to make the young saleswoman stop breathing for a moment. Her name tag read Claire Donovan, and unlike everyone else in the showroom, she recognized the symbol instantly. Blackstone Horizon Capital had financed half the new developments rising across downtown Atlanta during the past decade. Hospitals. Affordable housing. Scholarship foundations. The company name appeared constantly on local news stations, usually attached to billion-dollar projects or charity events. Claire looked from the emblem to Elijah's worn boots and dusty jacket, trying to reconcile the two images in her mind. Nathan noticed her expression and smirked. "What is it now?" he asked impatiently. Claire hesitated. "Nothing, sir." Nathan rolled his eyes and turned back toward Elijah. "Look, I have actual clients coming in soon." He motioned toward the entrance where a white Porsche pulled beneath the awning outside. Rainwater shimmered beneath the headlights. "If you are not purchasing today, I need to ask you not to waste showroom time." Elijah remained calm. He opened the card holder slowly and removed a black metal card unlike any ordinary credit card in the room. Even from several feet away, Claire could see the subtle platinum engraving across the surface. No bank logo. No flashy design. Just a name. Elijah Brooks. Nathan barely glanced at it before laughing softly through his nose. Cute. He reached for the card between two fingers like he expected it to be fake. But the second his skin touched the metal, his expression flickered almost invisibly. Heavy. Real. He recovered quickly. You know, he said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear again, there are people who come into luxury places just to feel important for 10 minutes. Elijah studied him carefully. And there are people, he replied quietly, who confuse arrogance with importance. The word settled heavily into the room. Claire looked down immediately, pretending to straighten brochures so nobody would notice the tension in her face. Near the espresso bar, the older couple stopped whispering altogether. Nathan's jaw tightened. He was no longer amused. Sir, he said coldly, I built my reputation understanding who belongs in this market. Elijah nodded once. That must save you a lot of time. Nathan did not catch the insult at first. Then he did. His cheeks flushed slightly beneath the showroom lights. Outside, thunder rolled again across the Atlanta skyline. The glass walls reflected the darkening clouds while water streaked slowly down the windows like melted silver. A valet opened the door for new arrivals, and humid evening air drifted briefly into the pristine showroom before disappearing again. Elijah slipped one hand into his jacket pocket and glanced once more toward the Phantom. Beautiful car, he said softly. My mother would love the back seats. Nathan folded his arms tighter. Your mother. She turns 70 next week. Elijah's voice carried warmth now, distant and personal. Spent most of her life cleaning homes for families who never remembered her last name. Claire looked at him again, more carefully this time. There was no anger in his face. No performance. Just memory. Nathan, however, only heard another story that did not belong inside his polished showroom. Well, he said sharply, dreams are free. Elijah's eyes shifted toward him slowly. No, he answered. Respect should be. Silence swallowed the room after that. Even the piano downstairs seemed quieter somehow. Nathan stared at Elijah for several long seconds, sensing the atmosphere slipping away from his control. Then, determined to regain it, he picked up the black metal card and held it toward Claire without even looking at her. Run it, he said dismissively. Let us all enjoy the result together. Claire swallowed hard before taking the card carefully from his hand, almost like she already knew something the rest of the room did not. Claire Donovan walked toward the payment desk with careful steps, the black metal card resting against her palm like something fragile and dangerous at the same time. The closer she moved beneath the recessed ceiling lights, the heavier the atmosphere inside the showroom became. Nathan Whitmore leaned casually against the Phantom beside Elijah Brooks, but the confidence in his posture had started to look forced now, stretched thin beneath the silence settling around the room. Several customers pretended to browse nearby vehicles while quietly watching everything unfold through reflections in the polished glass walls. Claire slid behind the marble payment counter and inserted the card into the terminal. For a second, nothing happened. The machine hummed softly beneath the low jazz music drifting from the second-floor balcony. Nathan smirked again, sensing the pause as proof he was right. Take your time, he called out with a chuckle. Sometimes those prepaid cards need a minute. A few nervous laughs answered him, though weaker than before. Elijah said nothing. He stood beside the Phantom with one hand resting lightly on the old wooden cane, his eyes fixed on the rain outside instead of the people staring at him. Claire swallowed as the terminal screen refreshed. Then her entire expression changed. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. The color slowly drained from her face. She blinked once. Then twice. Nathan straightened slightly. Problem, he asked. Claire looked up at him but did not answer immediately. Her voice, when it finally came out, sounded quieter than before. Sir. I think you should come see this. Nathan gave an irritated sigh and pushed himself off the car. What now? He walked across the marble floor with polished shoes clicking sharply against the stone. The closer he got to the counter, the slower his pace became. Claire angled the screen toward him without speaking. Nathan glanced down casually at first. Then his expression stopped moving altogether. Approval confirmed. Available balance displayed more zeros than he expected to see outside corporate accounts. Beneath it sat private banking credentials tied directly to Blackstone Horizon Capital. Nathan stared at the name attached to the account. Elijah Brooks. The room felt suddenly smaller. The piano upstairs continued playing softly, but nobody was listening anymore. Nathan looked back toward Elijah almost instinctively, like he needed to verify the man still standing beside the phantom was the same person connected to the screen in front of him. Elijah met his gaze calmly. No smile. No satisfaction. Just stillness. Claire lowered her voice carefully. Sir, this account can purchase the entire showroom. Nathan's throat tightened visibly. He glanced around quickly, suddenly aware of the customers nearby pretending not to watch him panic. Sweat gathered faintly beneath his collar despite the cool air conditioning drifting through the building. There has to be some mistake, he muttered. Claire shook her head once. No, sir. Elijah finally stepped forward slowly, each movement measured and unhurried. The reflection of the showroom lights moved softly across the dark glass of the phantom behind him. Is the payment approved? He asked gently. Claire nodded immediately. Yes, sir. Completely approved. Nathan opened his mouth but no words came out at first. Just moments ago, he had spoken to Elijah like a man trespassing somewhere he did not belong. Now the silence pressing against his chest felt almost unbearable. Outside, another flash of lightning rolled across the Atlanta skyline, illuminating the wet pavement beyond the glass windows in pale silver. Elijah looked toward the phantom again. Good, he said softly. My mother always liked black. Nathan forced a stiff laugh that sounded painful even to himself. Mr. Brooks, if I misunderstood anything earlier, Elijah turned his eyes toward him slowly. Not angry. Somehow worse than angry. Disappointed. Nathan felt it immediately. The older couple near the espresso bar lowered their eyes. Even the valet near the entrance stood unusually still. Because everyone in the room understood what had just happened. Nathan Whitmore had not judged Elijah by character. He had judged him before character ever had the chance to speak. The silence inside Whitmore Luxury Motors no longer felt elegant. It felt exposed. Every polished surface in the showroom now reflected the same uncomfortable truth back at the people standing there. Nathan Whitmore remained frozen beside the payment counter, one hand resting against the marble edge as though he suddenly needed support to stay upright. Across the room, Elijah Brooks stood beside the black phantom with the calm patience of a man who had experienced this moment many times before. Not this exact showroom. Not this exact manager. But the same expression. The same realization spreading slowly across someone's face after discovering they had measured him wrong from the beginning. Claire Donovan carefully removed the payment card from the terminal and held it with both hands before walking toward Elijah. Her posture had changed completely now. Softer. Respectful. Your payment has been fully processed, Mr. Brooks, she said quietly. Elijah accepted the card with a small nod. Thank you. Nathan finally cleared his throat. Mr. Brooks, I think we may have started off on the wrong foot. Elijah looked at him for a long moment before answering. No, he said calmly. I think we started exactly where you wanted us to. The words landed harder than any raised voice could have. Nathan glanced around instinctively, aware that every employee within earshot had gone completely still. Even the customers nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. Outside, the rain had started again, soft drops sliding down the towering glass windows while Atlanta traffic blurred beneath the evening lights. Nathan forced another weak smile. I assure you, I treat all clients with professionalism. Elijah tilted his head slightly. Do you? Nathan's jaw tightened. Elijah stepped closer now, not aggressively, just enough for his voice to carry clearly through the showroom. You saw my boots before you saw my name. You saw my skin before you saw my bank account. Nathan immediately shook his head. That is not fair. Elijah's eyes stayed calm. Is it not? The question lingered painfully between them. Claire lowered her gaze again. Somewhere near the staircase, a salesman quietly walked away, unwilling to remain part of the moment any longer. Elijah looked down briefly at the old cane in his hand, his thumb brushing across the worn scratches in the wood. My mother used to clean office buildings at night, he said softly. People would leave coffee cups on desks for her to throw away but never look her in the eye. The room remained silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioning overhead. One Christmas, Elijah continued, she saved for 6 months to buy me a winter coat because ours got stolen from the laundromat. She wrapped it in newspaper because she could not afford wrapping paper. Nathan stared at him without speaking. She told me something I never forgot, Elijah said. She said, son, some people will decide your value before you even open your mouth. Do not become one of them. Claire felt her throat tighten listening to him. There was no anger in Elijah's voice. That was what made it hurt more. Nathan looked suddenly smaller standing beneath the showroom lights that had once made him appear untouchable. Mr. Brooks, he began carefully, I apologize if I made assumptions. Elijah gave a faint nod. You did. Nathan swallowed hard. I did not know who you were. Elijah looked directly at him then. Exactly. The word struck like cold rain. Because everyone in the room understood what he meant. Respect should not require recognition first. Elijah glanced once more toward the phantom, the deep black paint reflecting silver streaks of rainwater through the glass outside. I came here today because my mother spent 30 years serving people who never thought twice about her dignity, he said quietly. I wanted to buy her something beautiful before she turned 70. Nathan opened his mouth again, but nothing came out this time. He could not defend himself anymore because the truth was standing right in front of him wearing dusty boots and holding an old wooden cane. Rain tapped softly against the towering showroom windows while nobody inside seemed willing to move first. The tension had shifted now from embarrassment into something quieter, heavier, almost reflective. Nathan Whitmore stood near the marble counter with his hands clasped too tightly in front of him, his expensive suit suddenly looking stiff and uncomfortable beneath the pale ceiling lights. Across from him, Elijah Brooks remained calm beside the black phantom, the smooth paint reflecting silver streaks from the storm outside like moving shadows across water. Claire Donovan quietly handed a folder to another employee and stepped back, giving the room space to breathe again. But the silence did not disappear. It settled deeper instead. Elijah slowly walked around the phantom once more, fingertips brushing lightly across the polished surface. My mother still takes the bus, he said after a while, his voice low enough that people had to lean slightly closer to hear him. Nathan looked up carefully. Elijah gave a faint smile, though sadness lingered behind it. Even after everything changed. Outside, headlights glowed through the rain like blurred lanterns drifting along the wet Atlanta streets. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly again. Elijah stopped beside the rear passenger door and stared at his own reflection in the dark glass. I bought her a house 6 years ago, he continued. Big porch. Garden in the back. Enough space for every grandchild to run around during summer cookouts. Nathan listened without interrupting now. She still wakes up before sunrise every morning, Elijah said. Still folds grocery bags to reuse later. Still apologizes when she buys anything expensive for herself. His thumb rested briefly against the cane handle again, tracing the worn scratches left by his father decades earlier. Last month I asked her why she never treats herself. Elijah's voice softened further. She said people like her are taught not to get too comfortable with nice things because they can always be taken away. The showroom fell completely still after that. Even the customers who had once laughed now looked quietly ashamed standing beneath the warm chandelier light. Nathan lowered his eyes toward the marble floor. The reflection staring back at him no longer looked successful. It looked small. Elijah turned slowly toward the enormous windows overlooking the rain-soaked street outside. "You know what the strange thing is?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered. "Money changed the way people greet me. It changed the restaurants that suddenly had tables available. It changed which neighborhoods smiled when I walked through them." He paused briefly. "But it never changed the first look." Nathan swallowed hard. Elijah finally looked back at him. "That first look tells you everything." Claire felt her chest tighten hearing the words because she knew exactly what he meant. Some people decided trust in an instant. Some decided fear. Some decided worth. Long before conversation ever began. Nathan exhaled slowly and rubbed one hand across his jaw, struggling to maintain composure. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, "I truly am sorry." Elijah studied him carefully. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just tired understanding. "I believe you are sorry now," he answered gently. The honesty in the response hurt more than rejection would have. Nathan looked away almost immediately. Outside, rainwater streamed down the glass in silver ribbons while a city bus rolled past the dealership under flickering streetlights. Elijah watched it disappear into the storm for several seconds. Then he smiled faintly to himself. "My mother would still choose that bus," he murmured. "Even after all this." Claire blinked back sudden emotion she had not expected to feel tonight. Because standing inside one of the most expensive luxury dealerships in Georgia, surrounded by imported leather and crystal lighting, Elijah Brooks somehow sounded less impressed by wealth than anyone else in the room. And for the first time all evening, Nathan Whitmore realized the man he had tried to humiliate had never walked into the showroom hoping to prove he belonged there. He had walked in already knowing his worth. For several long seconds, nobody inside Whitmore Luxury Motors spoke at all. Rain continued sliding down the tall glass windows while the city outside dissolved into blurred headlights and wet pavement. The warm chandelier light above the showroom floor suddenly felt too bright, exposing every uncomfortable expression in the room. Nathan Whitmore stood motionless near the payment counter, but his mind had already begun replaying every word he had spoken since Elijah Brooks first walked through the doors. The dusty boots. The old pickup truck. The hesitation in his voice whenever he said the word sir. Piece by piece, the memory became unbearable. Claire Donovan quietly stepped closer to the reception desk computer again, partly to give the two men space, partly because she needed a moment to steady herself. But when the homepage refreshed automatically on the screen, a large photograph appeared across the business news banner at the top. Elijah Brooks stood beside a groundbreaking ceremony downtown, holding a silver shovel beneath bright Georgia sunlight while children from a local school crowded around him smiling. Claire froze instantly. Beneath the image, the headline read, "Blackstone Horizon announces $40 million scholarship expansion for low-income students across Georgia." Nathan noticed Claire staring at the screen and instinctively turned toward it. The moment he saw the photograph, something inside him seemed to collapse completely. Elijah in a tailored charcoal suit. Elijah standing beside city officials. Elijah shaking hands with pastors, teachers, and community leaders. The same man Nathan had spoken down to less than an hour earlier because of worn boots and dark skin. Claire swallowed hard. "He funds half the youth housing projects in Atlanta," she said softly before she could stop herself. Nobody answered. Nathan stepped closer to the monitor slowly, eyes fixed on the article now scrolling across the screen. There were photographs of Elijah visiting hospitals. Donating computers to schools. Standing beside elderly women holding oversized house keys during charity events. In every image, he wore the same calm expression he carried now standing beside the phantom. Not arrogance. Not performance. Just quiet purpose. Nathan remembered his own words suddenly with painful clarity. People like him do not belong in places like this. The sentence echoed in his chest like something rotten. Elijah noticed the article on the screen but did not react much. He had spent years watching strangers transform the moment they discovered his net worth. Shock first. Then respect. Then embarrassment. It always followed the same order. Nathan rubbed a hand slowly across his forehead. I had no idea, he murmured almost to himself. Elijah looked at him calmly. That is the point. Nathan's throat tightened again. Outside, a city bus rolled past beneath the rain, splashing water against the curb while brake lights painted the wet street red. Elijah glanced toward it briefly before returning his eyes to Nathan. You know something, he said quietly. When my company interviews executives, we sometimes send candidates to community events without introductions. Nathan blinked, confused. Elijah continued. No titles. No suits. No special treatment. We watch how they speak to janitors. Servers. Parking attendants. Claire listened closely now. Why? Nathan asked weakly. Elijah gave a faint smile. Because character reveals itself most honestly around people you think cannot change your future. The word settled over the room with devastating weight. Nathan looked down immediately, unable to hold Elijah's gaze any longer. For the first time in years, his expensive title felt meaningless. The customers nearby slowly drifted farther away now, not wanting to witness more of the humiliation unfolding beneath the elegant showroom lights. But Nathan barely noticed them anymore. Because standing there beside the marble counter, he finally understood something much worse than losing an argument. He understood that Elijah Brooks had walked into the showroom with dignity already intact. The only thing truly exposed tonight had been Nathan's own reflection. The storm outside had softened into a steady drizzle by the time the showroom doors opened again. A tall older man in a charcoal overcoat hurried inside carrying a tablet against his chest, rainwater still clinging to his shoulders. The moment employees noticed him, their posture changed instantly. Richard Whitmore, owner of Whitmore Luxury Motors and Nathan Whitmore's father, rarely visited the showroom this late in the evening unless something serious had happened. Richard's sharp eyes moved quickly across the room before settling on Elijah Brooks standing beside the Black Phantom. For a brief second, surprise crossed his face. Then recognition. Mr. Brooks, Richard said immediately, walking forward with his hand extended. I am terribly sorry for the delay. I came as soon as I received the call. Nathan looked up sharply, stunned by the tone in his father's voice. Respectful. Nervous even. Elijah shook Richard's hand calmly. Good evening. Richard glanced once toward his son and immediately sensed the damage already done. The silence in the room explained everything before Nathan even spoke. Claire quietly stepped farther back near the reception desk, giving the family space while customers nearby pretended not to watch. Richard exhaled slowly. Nathan, he said without looking away from Elijah, what happened here? Nathan's throat moved, but no words came out at first. The confidence he carried earlier had disappeared completely now. Finally he managed, I made a mistake. Richard closed his eyes briefly like the answer confirmed his worst fear. Mr. Brooks, he said carefully, your foundation funded the pediatric wing at St. Anne Medical Center after my wife's surgery 3 years ago. Elijah looked slightly surprised by that. Richard nodded once. The nurses still talk about it. For the first time all evening, Nathan looked genuinely shaken beyond embarrassment. He stared at Elijah differently now, no longer through the lens of wealth alone, but through the sudden realization that the man standing in front of him had quietly changed lives without demanding attention for it. Richard turned toward his son slowly. Do you understand who this man is? Nathan lowered his eyes immediately. Elijah answered before Nathan could speak. That is not the important question. Richard looked back at him. Elijah's voice remained calm, almost gentle now. The important question is why respect only arrived after recognition did. The room fell silent again. Rain slid down the windows behind them in long silver lines while distant traffic lights glowed against the wet Atlanta streets outside. Richard nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Nathan finally spoke, his voice lower than anyone had heard it all evening. You are right. Elijah studied him carefully. There was no satisfaction in his face. Only exhaustion that seemed older than the moment itself. Nathan rubbed his palms together nervously before forcing himself to continue. I spent so many years believing success meant learning how to identify important people quickly. He gave a bitter laugh at himself. Turns out I only learned how to judge people quickly. Claire looked down at the floor, feeling the truth of the sentence settle across the showroom. Richard stepped closer to his son, disappointment visible across his tired face. Tomorrow morning we will discuss your position here, he said quietly. Nathan nodded once, accepting it. But before Richard could say more, Elijah raised one hand gently. Do not fire him. Both men looked at him immediately. Richard frowned slightly. Mr. Brooks, after what happened tonight, Elijah shook his head. Humiliation teaches very little. Reflection teaches more. Nathan stared at him in disbelief. Elijah glanced once more toward the phantom before speaking again. My mother used to tell me something whenever people treated her poorly. His voice softened with memory. She said, never become cruel just because cruelty found you first. The words seemed to drain the remaining tension from the room. Nathan's eyes lowered again, but this time not from shame alone. Gratitude had entered them too. Outside, the rain finally began to slow, and for the first time all evening, the showroom no longer felt cold. Rain still shimmered across the Atlanta streets as Elijah Brooks guided his old pickup truck through the quiet downtown traffic. Behind him, the black Rolls-Royce Phantom moved smoothly beneath glowing streetlights, its polished surface reflecting red brake lights and silver streaks of water across the pavement. Inside the truck, Elijah rested one hand gently on the old wooden cane beside him while the faded photograph of his mother sat quietly on the passenger seat. He glanced at it during a red light and smiled to himself. Somewhere across the city, she was asleep without any idea that tomorrow morning her life would change forever. Back inside Whitmore Luxury Motors, Nathan Whitmore remained standing behind the giant showroom windows long after everyone else had gone home. The marble floors looked colder now beneath the dimmed chandelier lights. He loosened his tie slowly and stared at his own reflection in the glass, remembering every word he had spoken earlier that evening. For the first time in years, the expensive suit on his back no longer felt like success. It felt heavy. Outside, Elijah's dusty pickup disappeared farther into the rain while the Phantom followed quietly behind like a moving shadow of redemption. Nathan watched until both vehicles vanished completely into the misty Atlanta night. Then the showroom fell silent around him again. Not the silence of luxury. Not the silence of power. The silence of realization. Because somewhere between the worn boots, the old truck, and the calm voice of a man he had underestimated, Nathan Whitmore finally understood something that money could never purchase. The most valuable people in the world often arrive looking like ordinary strangers.